Hi, it's Dwyer. It is November 28th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. I'm just going to talk off the top of my head about some things that have caught my attention here in sports. First, uh, there was a VSiN show that I watched. It's the show with Gil Alexander and Kelly Bidlin. And they were commenting on a Stan Van Gundy line that if you had every player who has played in the NBA available to pick, right? According to Stan Van Gundy, and Gil Alexander somewhat agreed with this assessment, Joker would be the first player picked in that draft. Right now, guys, men and women, right? Um, Let me just make a few points here. I'm someone who has been alive for the entire Jordan era and for the LeBron era, and I don't even understand the question of Jordan or LeBron. Right? It's not close. It's Michael Jordan. Don't believe me? Just look at Jordan's all defensive teams. Folks, that's not close. Right? Look at Jordan's MVPs. And Jordan's a guy who took off time in the middle of his career. That's not close. Now, I have been here online. I feel Joker should have won the MVP the year they gave it to Embiid. I'm a big Joker fan. I love Joker's three-point shot. That's new for a center. Right? Love it. Folks, he's not close. He's not even in the arena to Wilt Chamberlain defensively. He's not he's not in the conversation with Wilt Chamberlain as an athlete. Right? Understand too. Joker now has made getting, a lot of assists as a center fashionable. Folks, just understand the prototype of that is Wilt, who one year led the league in assists from the center position. If you look at two talented players, and one's a freak athlete who has a side to his game. Wilt's a shot blocker, right? Has a side to his game. Wilt's entire defense that the other guy doesn't have. Folks, it's a mismatch. I'll agree. Joker is, one of the best players I've seen. Let's stop kidding ourselves. He's not Wilt Chamberlain, right? Let me also say, too, we need to start to realize that some of these guys back in the day got shortchanged because we didn't keep stats. Right? Jordan, in an interview once, talked about how if he could go back in history, he would love to play against Jerry West. Now, people thought Jordan was just picking an NBA icon, the logo, and praising Jerry. Right, folks? The truth is very different, right? Keep in mind, West, different years, leads the league in scoring, leads the league in assists, and that's while he's playing with superstars. Right? Elgin Baylor, Wilt, right? Gail Goodrich, look him up. Right? And somehow it's Jerry West who's getting his. Right? Well, just understand, if you look at Jerry West and if you look at Jerry West's all defensive teams, and keep in mind too, West, great outside shooter, they didn't have a three-point shot in the NBA back then. Right? Long distance shooters like Jerry couldn't pad their numbers with threes. Well, if you look at Jerry's all defensive teams, just understand Jerry's on several all defensive teams. They didn't have all defensive teams for the first half of Jerry's career. Right? So, if you ask me, Jerry is at least as good defensively as he was offensively. And understand, the Jordan comparison's a good one because Jerry's nickname was Mr. Clutch. Right? So, as I look at all of these NBA players, I don't think this is track and field. I don't think this is a setup where, I can just assume that today's guys in the 100, given their times, would smoke the guys from the past. I don't believe that at all. Right? I think Jerry West is one of the best players in NBA history. Right? I think when you're looking at Jerry and you understand, if Jordan was on a team with Elgin Baylor, look at his numbers. Right? Jordan might take fewer shots. His scoring might dip. When you realize that Jerry, who in his last year averaged well over 2 steals a game. Right? Jerry's problem was Jerry was his own biggest critic. Right? Jerry thought his game was slipping. Right? His game slipped so much that I believe that last year he averaged something like 2.4 steals a game or 2.2 steals a game. Right? So, folks, let's cut it out. In other words, I know there are some young guys out there who saw LeBron, and thought, my God, I haven't seen this size. He's physically bigger than Jordan. There was a time when LeBron was making the all-defensive team every year. Right? They saw LeBron. We were preconditioned to believe that there would be the next Jordan. Right? Wasn't Allen Iverson's nickname the answer? Right? Then you saw LeBron and you thought, okay, this is where this generation takes over. Right, folks? LeBron's not close. I mean, not close to Jordan defensively. Right? Not close. Understand, the Miami Heat were favored in an NBA Finals against Dirk and the Mavericks. They lost that NBA Finals. Right? We can talk about Cleveland making an NBA Finals where it's LeBron and 4 other dudes. Right? The bottom line, though, is LeBron lost an NBA Finals where he was favored. Right? I would argue that, San Antonio was on the verge of winning an NBA Finals. And then Chris Bosh kicks it out to Ray Allen, who is out at the three-point line. Allen has like a second to get the shot off, doesn't blink, grabs the ball, shoots, hits the three. That's what got that series to Game 7. And a win by LeBron's Heat. I would even question whether LeBron's alpha on the Heat. I thought that was Dwayne Wade's team. I lived through the era. We can debate it. But I thought the same way that the Bulls looked at Jordan in tight moments, the Heat looked at Dwayne Wade in tight moments. Right? So, all I can say is if we're going to go back through history, given that you've had some freak athletes who did things that today are hard to believe. If you just look at Wilt films, and I have one posted at gamblersadvisory.com. It's been up there for over a year. You know that Joker doesn't have the foot speed to keep up with Wilt. Right? Also understand, Wilt Chamberlain was the tall guy who walks in the room upright. Right? He's not bending over. He's not trying to look intellectual. Right? He's a guy who was not afraid to dominate. Right? Goes through a basketball year where he averages more than 50 points per game. Right? I know Wilt would welcome the opportunity to go up against Joker. Right? Understand too, Wilt didn't have a sky hook. Right? Kareem's sky hook was unstoppable. But Wilt had a turn around jumper that was unstoppable. right? Joker would be a bystander watching Wilt unfold his offense. And who would you be more afraid of? Let's say you're on a fast break. You feel that the center on the other team is catching up with you. Who are you more afraid of blocking your shot? Joker or Wilt Chamberlain? Folks, I mean, you give me one pick. Right now, I'm a Jordan guy. If it's not Jordan, it's Wilt. I'm not even considering other players. Right? I mean, you know, um, Kevin Durant isn't in the ballpark with Wilt in terms of defense. Right? Wilt Chamberlain was one of the savants in NBA history in terms of rebounding. Let me continue. Um, Football, right? Wow. What a Thanksgiving. What a day after Thanksgiving, right? Here's what I want people to think about. The Baltimore Ravens have revealed themselves as having a suspect defense, right? Lamar Jackson, folks, he looks a little bit gimpy to me, right? This is the athlete who, as you could imagine, is more banged up than reported, but he wants to play. He's a warrior. Not only that, the Ravens going into yesterday's game were tied with the Steelers in terms of record, right? So Lamar has a reason to want to play, right? But folks, Lamar's not 100%. He's not close to 100%. This defense has structural problems. Let me just say, too, that either Derrick Henry is banged up and isn't close to 100%, or Father Time is catching up with him. Right? I know he scored a touchdown. The problem was the rest of the game. Right? So, now you have a game that looks better on paper than it actually is. The Buffalo Bills are coming to play the Pittsburgh Steelers. Right now, I'll just put it to you diplomatically. And I understand the line looks close and stuff like that. The Buffalo Bills on the season are below 500 on the road. Did you know that? You want to talk about a team with a problem. Josh Allen is one of the most athletically gifted quarterbacks in the league, right? Just like Wilt Chamberlain has an athleticism gap on Joker, right? Just understand that. Let me add too. Joker's three. Wilt would go out to the three-point line to stick him. That's the level of athlete we're talking about. Josh Allen is one of the best athletes at quarterback in the National Football League. And you're telling me that he got sacked 8 times last week? 8 times? Now the Steelers are coming off a game where they rushed for over 150 yards. Right? The Steelers ran the football extremely well with Mason Rudolph at quarterback. The Steelers just saw Baltimore lose. They have the Steelers, let's think wild card too, right? Because it's close right now in the AFC North. Steelers have to think wild card. They just saw Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs lose. So this is a golden opportunity against a team that's below 500 on the road, that just gave up 8 sacks, and the Steelers have a pass rush. This is a huge opportunity for the Steelers to draw a line in the sand and say, no, we are the top team right now in the AFC North. Right? So let's all look at that game. Buffalo comes to Pittsburgh. Right, folks? The Steelers are catching Buffalo at the right time. If the Steelers find a way to give away this game, even with their rushing attack looking good last week, with the offensive line of the Bills beaten up, giving up 8 sacks, if the Steelers can't close the door, they have big problems. Okay, let me diplomatically say this too. You have playoffs coming up where you have some clearly vulnerable teams. Right, folks? I've been here online complaining about the Philadelphia Eagle offense. Right, folks? I'm just telling you, and I know it's hard to believe after this performance in Philly by the Bears. Right? Bear defense isn't that good. You don't have to believe me. You can go on the results and you can, bet your way. It's your money. Let me just tell you, I don't consider the Bears, who are leading their division, I don't consider the Bears to be better than either Detroit or Green Bay. Right? So, some of these teams that aren't that good are going to make the playoffs. Some of these better teams are going to have to win road playoff games. Right? Let me say this too. Some quality teams in the NFC are not going to make the playoffs because the Bears, with this win, have really placed themselves in a great position to make the playoffs either as a division winner or as a wild card. Right? So that's going to put pressure on teams like the Cowboys, who in back-to-back games beat the Super Bowl. Well, put it this way, beat Kansas City. Right? Let me say this about the Cowboys. The Cowboys' last two games were both at home. Right? They also beat the Eagles, right? They beat the two teams in the Super Bowl, but they were both at home. The Cowboys really do have a subpar defense. The question now is going to be, can the Cowboys take the show on the road? Right? That's a big question. Right? They're 6-5-1. They have a shot at the playoffs. It's a thin shot because, of course, we know the Rams are going to make the playoffs. We know Seattle's going to make the playoffs. The Niners, who I don't think can go deep in the playoffs, look well positioned. If the Niners beat Cleveland, right, and that's a game in which they're favored. If the Niners can beat Cleveland, you're looking at the Niners, you're looking at the Bears, and you're thinking one of these teams is going to take a wild card spot. Right? Aren't you thinking that? Then you have legitimate teams. The Pack, the Lions, whoever doesn't win the NFC West out of LA and Seattle. Right? So, folks, quality teams are going to be left out. And you're going to have some fugazi, some teams that overachieved in the playoffs, right? The Niners, all I can say is, who's their number one receiver? Right? The Bears, Brock Purdy has been to a Super Bowl. As I keep saying here, when he left the field in overtime, he did so with a lead. Right? You're telling me Caleb Williams, a second-year guy, is going to be able to beat this level of opposition in the playoffs to make it to the Super Bowl? I don't think so. Let's switch up to boxing. Now, let me just say Fabio Wardley is wrong. He said, if I was anyone else, they would say that Usyk is ducking me. Right? Let me correct him here on YouTube. That's not true because I'm saying Usyk's ducking you. Now, the reality is that this is professional prize fighting. Right? Usyk needs to, get deals that fill his pockets. Right? Get top dollar. Now, just think about the Usyk situation, right? He's 38 years old. The fact that he's not leaping at the opportunity to fight Fabio Wardley, who he would have the advantage over in negotiations, right? Wardley hasn't been heavyweight champion. The negotiations would be different than they would be if he was negotiating with Tyson Fury, if he was negotiating with Anthony Joshua, right? And of course, you have ground zero for boxing, right? The epicenter of boxing in this era, and that's the United Kingdom for the heavyweight division. I believe if Usyk were to fight Fabio Wardley, it would be a box office bonanza. But I believe Usyk has figured out that the boxing hardcore here online knows who Fabio Wardley is, right? I'm interested in that fight. Right? You know, the bottom line is you go to your local bar outside of the UK and people don't know who Fabio Wardley is. Right? I don't think Usyk is avoiding Fabio Wardley to fight some other guy who can knock him out. Right? Martin Bakole, I don't think that's the intention here. Efe Ajagba, I don't think that's the intention here. Guido Vianello, I don't think that's the intention here. Right? Boza Zatama, I don't think that's the intention here. So let's be real. You know what's going on. Some promoter has spoken to Usyk. Usyk now is in that zone where he can fight high-profile opposition that he feels safe fighting. Folks, he's already beaten Tyson Fury. Right now, that fight can be sold, a third fight, by, pointing out that that first fight was razor close, wasn't unanimous. Right? So, of course, the argument would be that Fury has been busily training in the background, and now here he is. There's little damage to, let's say, Tyson Fury's legacy or to Usyk's legacy, because both guys have credibility with the public. Both guys are known, right? If AJ destroys, and I don't see that happening, by the way, but if AJ destroys Jake Paul, AJ's star is going to shine brightly. AJ could say, hey, look, I want to redeem myself. I've switched up my trainers. I'm ready now. And that AJ Usyk fight would be a blockbuster. Right? So let's just say I believe Usyk is carefully picking opponents. As I mentioned in an earlier video too, there's an ongoing question in boxing. Does the title make the fighter? Or does the fighter make the title? I get the feeling that if I were with some boxing fans and I said, who's the heavyweight champion? Most of the people in the crowd would say, Usyk. Right? They're not going to say, well, Usyk's not this champion because he gave up this belt and hasn't fought the mandatory. That's too many syllables for most people. So Usyk knows that. So as long as Usyk fights a credible opponent, right, he has political cover. Right? Fabio Wardley, I'm sure this is the Usyk version. Fabio Wardley isn't known enough for Usyk to risk his belt against. You and I know Fabio Wardley has the level of aggression to make that fight an interesting fight. This is not Daniel Dubois with a huge foot speed gap between the two men. Right? This is a white collar boxer, a guy who came up the rough way. Right? Who, understood you have to go for it to get paid. Right? That's the mindset. This is the hungry man who a sanctioning body is saying is the mandatory contender. Now, Usyk moves extremely well, is a southpaw. That's an added dynamic. Is hard to find in the ring, is slippery. Probably a better athlete than Fabio Wardley. Right? So Usyk's hard to catch up with. But you just saw Wardley have a tough go of it with Joe Parker and stay at it. right? What's the end of that fight? Wardley catches up with him toward the closing seconds of the 10th round. Then Wardley comes out, gets a stoppage in the 11th round or so. Double check me on that. But let's just say Wardley would treat it as the opportunity professionally of his boxing career. You know he would come after Usyk. He wouldn't be measured. So do I think Usyk is dodging Wardley? Yes, I do. Right? But I will say, he's dodging Wardley for some other high profile person who hasn't been disclosed yet. Right? There's a lot of conversation in the background. Think about it. Daniel Dubois was supposed to fight Joe Parker. Would have been a tough fight for Dubois, in my opinion. He was supposed to fight Joe Parker. Then he suddenly, at the last minute, and it was the last minute, developed some respiratory problem, or so we were told. Right? So in stepped Bacoli, who wasn't even in the country. You know what happened next. Dubois ends up signing to fight Usyk for much bigger money. Right? That respiratory problem, wow, was that convenient, wasn't it? I believe we're dealing with a variation of that. Right? Here's Wardley, he's earned it. Right? He's your mandatory contender, he's real. He definitely has a puncher's chance. That right hand is explosive. Right? He continues to bring it, whether it's Justice Hune, who's outboxing him, whether it's Joe Parker, who at least one judge thought was outboxing him. Right? That doesn't discourage Wardley. Right? We're going to find out that Usyk is getting bigger money to fight someone else. At this stage, he's prepared to pull a Riddick Bowe, right? Throw the belts in the garbage, right? Bowe didn't want to fight Lennox Lewis, a worthy opponent, right? He's going to do the thing he did earlier, right? You remember he abdicated a title before. Let's talk about some other issues in boxing. Folks, 2026 already has some spectacular fights on the horizon that are going to have consequences. Right? 154 is interesting. You have Ennis at 154. You have Murtazaliev. By the way, Murtazaliev was the mandatory contender for years, plural. People were dodging him. He was accepting step-aside money. Right? That's the sport we live in here. Right? You're the number one contender. You're worthy. Murtazaliev, unbeaten. Guys pay you not to fight them. Right? Xander Zayas, that's a name you need to know. Virgil Ortiz, that's another name you need to know. Of course, the Towering Inferno. Sebastian Fundora. Well, let me just say this. You have an interesting development. I know. The Devin Haney people want to fight Raleigh Romero. Right? The idea is Devin Haney wants to collect belts. Right? He's now at 147. He has a belt. It'd be a unification. It's an easy sell to the public. Also, Romero, of course, beat Ryan Garcia, who's fighting Mario Barrios. Be careful what you wish for. Right? Mario Barrios' interpretation of having a title is to get ties. Right? Abel Ramos, Manny Pacquiao. Right? But still, understand, this is a guy who was a champion in another weight class. Right? He's now a champion in 147. Ryan Garcia looked lackluster against Raleigh Romero. Right? Here's what I want people to consider. And let me throw another name into the mix. 2026 could be his year, quite frankly. I personally thought William Zepeda was going to beat Shakur Stevenson. Right? I thought Stevenson, if bum rushed, would have a problem keeping a hyper-aggressive guy off of him, just like I have that feeling privately about Usyk. right? Just like if they announce Usyk Martin Bacoli, I'm making a bet that day on Martin Bacoli, right? Shakur Stevenson proved me wrong. Stevenson was masterful on his back foot. Stevenson could handle the constant pressure, right? Stevenson's defense is that good. Well, Stevenson is about to fight Teofimo Lopez at 147. Here's my point to you on Stevenson, and this is overdue, because Stevenson's defense is so stellar. This is that rare guy who can jump weight classes, right? Just like Roy Jones. Roy Jones's hand speed was so blinding, Jones could literally jump up and fight guys in different weight classes. James Toney. I need for folks to look at his record carefully, right? Toney jumped up to light heavyweight, fought Giraffe. The defense and everything was there, right? Toney had boxing skills that could allow him to travel. Now, the question with Stevenson, right? And there's a similar question with Devin Haney. Haney, his legs are so great that you wonder style-wise what would happen if he were to jump to 154. He beat George Kambosos twice in Australia. He could take on Tim Tszyu in an early fight. Then he could jump up and he could take on a Murtazaliev or a Sebastian Fundora. Are you certain those guys would be able to keep up with Haney's leg speed? Well, the question with Shakur, right? Shakur making things happen for the Cleveland Browns, right? Nod to him. But I meant Shakur because I'm talking boxing here. The thing with Shakur Stevenson is not only hard to hit, he has a completely underrated, and he's a southpaw, straight left. It's completely underrated, right? So you get the feeling, while his fights, people don't like guys who are defensive masters. While his fights at 135 weren't that exciting. At 147, they're riveting. At 154, they would be off the page. Right? It would be interesting. Let's remember that Chukazian went the distance twice with Jaron Ennis. It's hard to envision Stevenson against Ennis, but Ennis would have a hard time hitting him. Stevenson would have the defensive edge, right? If Stevenson can somehow find a way to neutralize Ennis's power, that could be a 5-star fight, right? Now, don't get me wrong. Even guys with great defense have to acclimate to the new weight class, right? Let's see how Stevenson does against Teofimo Lopez. But we're in a world where certain fighters are showing you the ability to go through weight classes, right? Many people thought Norman was going to beat Devin Haney, right? A guy did get knocked down in that fight. It was Norman, not Haney, right? Haney was hard to find in the ring, wasn't he? Right? So now Haney is legitimately a champ at 147. He's the only loss on Norman's record. Right? And now you have Teofimo Lopez coming up to the division. You have Raleigh off a performance where he knocked down Ryan Garcia. You have Mario Barrios. And let me just say this. I know knockouts cause amnesia. Right? Mario Barrios went the first 6 rounds with Gervonta Davis, and he was winning that fight. That's the fight where Floyd Mayweather was in the crowd and felt the need to talk to Davis during the fight. Right? Understand, in terms of sudden power, Gervonta Davis and Manny Pacquiao are two guys with sudden, crushing power. Barrios has already fought them. Right? Mario Barrios, in a fight where he's able to maintain his first 6 rounds. He fell apart in the Abel Ramos fight in the last 6. Ramos comes storming back. If Mario Barrios can maintain his starts and can fight smart, keep boxing, he's dangerous. Right? Take a look at what's happening at 147 with an understanding that some of the guys at 154, and I think 154 is loaded, right? But some of the guys at 154, let's just say, would have a hard time finding a Haney or a Shakur Stevenson, right? A lot's happening. And of course, there is the alternative narrative. Let's say that Teofimo, who's masterful in the pocket, he is one of boxing's best in the pocket. If Teofimo Lopez, who has beaten Lomachenko, right? If he beats Shakur, there is the possibility that you'd have a fight between him and another man who beat Shakur, Devin Haney, right? In a new weight class. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear from you in the comments section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.